Livingston and Haven team. I'm a part of their HR leadership there. And I'm also on the education committee for the FPDA. So it's a real gift for me to be able to be in both of those roles. Our opportunity today is to really focus in on a leadership topic. And Bronson and Jerry Zimmerman are both going to be able to speak to that. But I wanted to do a couple of housekeeping things before we get going. One is, if you haven't already, go out to the FPDA website and sign up for the May 16th next webinar. It's going to be on leveraging AI for your sales teams. So if there's folks in your organization that might benefit, please pass that along, invite them so that they can also take part in these wonderful opportunities the FPDA offers. Secondly, we have FLM, the Future Leaders in Motion, which is in its second year. That class is going to finish up in October at the summit, but we're going to start registration for the next class. So be sure to keep an eye out for information on that. Registrations will start on June 1st, run through mid-August. And June 20th will be a webinar focused solely on FLM, where we've been and where we are going. And it will be joined by Bill Haley, who's been a big part of this. So be sure to have folks within your organization sign up for that who may be interested. Lastly, there's going to be a survey at the end of this webinar that will be emailed, and please give your feedback. We want to be able to make sure that these are good topics, these are applicable and relevant, and that we'll be able to service our 50 minutes in a good way so that you're getting something practical and to walk away with and apply in your roles. So with that, I just want to introduce to you Bronson Pasko. Following a 17-year career as an educator and administrator, Bronson transitioned from his role as an AVP for residential learning at Indiana Wesleyan. So he has a college type of background into the business world. And this was in 2015 when he joined Movement Mortgage based out of Fort Mill, South Carolina. And at Movement, Bronson helped launch Movement University, a corporate training program designed to recruit, train, and deploy new-to-industry professionals into business. By June of 2016, Bronson was promoted to the National Training and Development Director for Movement Mortgage. In 2019, he relocated to Greenville, South Carolina, where he took on a role of Director of HR at Lima One Capital. And he's actually just started a role in HR at JDA, a commercial real estate firm in Spartanburg. So he has got that up and going just recently. He is certified in talent optimization through Predictive Index and is a Gallup certified strengths coach. He enjoys helping organizations assess and empower their workforce to maximize employee engagement. We also have on who will be given an example of what Bronson is going to be talking about, Jerry Zimmerman. I've worked closely with him for 14 years here at Livingston and Haven Hyde Park Partners, where he's currently the president of Hyde Park Partners. So I look forward to you all hearing from him in just a few minutes. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Bronson and let everything get up and going. Again, if you have not already, please mute. And if you have any questions, use the chat box or raise your hand, and we'll be glad to be able to make use of that so that questions are answered. All right, Bronson, take it away.
Excellent. Great. Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to also do me a favor. I may ask you a couple questions and ask people to put their responses in the chat box. Would you kind of take a look at that and then feel free to share some of those once I ask those and people start giving responses?
Sure. Glad to.
Excellent. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Again, Chris, thank you. And thank you to everybody that has joined today for allowing me to spend some time with you. Again, my name is Bronson Pasko. Chris and I go back a long time, over 25 years, back to his days at King University in Bristol, Tennessee, when I was just starting kind of my higher education career, and he was just finishing his undergraduate career. And then we've just stayed in connection through some mutual friends, family connections. And so it's been a wonderful time for us to both kind of go through this HR journey together and learn together. Today, we're going to talk about something that I think is really relevant, especially to those of you, those that are here that have to be responsible and accountable to team members, to employees, to organizations, stakeholders, things like that, and this concept of transparency. Chris and I started talking about this, I don't know, 6 or so weeks ago in a conversation we were having. And we were just talking about employee engagement and what are some of the kind of interesting dynamics related to the workforce, the way that it's changed, quote unquote. And I'll say this several times, post-pandemic, understanding what I mean by that. What we're seeing is just kind of unprecedented numbers related to a lack of engagement and job changing. There has been some stabilization in the last year or so, but still these numbers remain extremely high, and unlike anything that we're used to seeing in the past related to kind of employee numbers. So what I'm going to do, let me make sure that. Sorry, it's not letting me start. Apologize, not letting me start. There we go. Okay, so today, yeah, Chris, can you give me a nod? Can you see it? All right, excellent. All right, so today we're going to talk about, as the title of the webinar indicates, transparency in the workplace, why it matters and how to practice it. So as I mentioned, Chris and I were talking about this several weeks ago, and this kind of concept of transparency came up. And keep in mind that the transparency in and of itself is really a kind of one factor in a greater, list of things related to really trust in the workplace. But this idea of transparency has really gained a lot of momentum in recent months and years, really related to certain topics coming out of the pandemic, related to how workforce production was monitored, what employers were communicating to their team members, and things like that. So we began to have this conversation all the same time. Gallup was coming out consistently with numbers talking about how workforce engagement and really workforce trust in their employers was plummeting, was really decreasing. So today we're going to cover what is transparency in the workplace, right? What does it look like? What are we actually? Why is transparency in the workplace important? What are the dynamics? What does it impact? How can transparency be modeled by leaders? So that's where you come in here on this webinar. How do you do it? We have the example that he's going to share a little bit later, one of the ways in which he's chosen to demonstrate that with his team. So there we go. But we're also going to talk about the potential challenges and things that you need to think through before you kind of launch into, or if you're going to kind of step into being a more transparent leader, or if you're going to, engage in more transparent practices related to your business. There are some potential things that you have to be aware of. And then we're also going to talk about maybe the most important aspect of this whole kind of webinar that I would really challenge you to think about is identifying the motive, the why behind why you want to do this, and then making sure that you're intentional with following through on that motive. And then lastly, assessing and evaluating. As any good educator, I'm always thinking about assessing any practice that you do, anything you put in place, make sure you're kind of monitoring that to see how it's happening, how it's going, measuring the success, and then afterwards getting a group of people together and then really evaluating, looking at those numbers, that assessment, and determining how that's going. Is it working? Is it getting you to where you want to go from a directional standpoint? All right, so now let's jump into what is transparency in the workplace. And the answer is, well, it depends. First and foremost, you have to think about this. You have to think about what direction are you talking about when it relates to transparency? Because ultimately we're talking about communicating with others. And so when we say transparency, and I think for the context of this webinar, this session, I think we're all, for the most part, understood that we're talking about employer to employee, or top down, or communicating from a leadership perspective, right? So employer to employee. However, there's also, of course, course, from a transparency perspective, there's also employee to employer. How do you want to engage in that? And do you want to promote employee to employer transparency? And if so, there's a lot of strategies and some things you have to be intentional about how you're going to provide those avenues for that type of communication and transparency. Then there's employee to employee transparency. A lot of shared spaces these days in the workplace. And then what kind of information do we want to allow employees to know about each other or to share about each other? There's with the onset, especially of office environments, with the introduction to Slack, there's a lot of access to employee information that has to be monitored and has to be kind of can be something that you can monitor from an HR perspective, but also from a leadership perspective, can be tempting to monitor those chats and to pick up what's going on. Is that being transparent? Well, it's certainly being transparent from the employee in terms of the information you're getting, but are you being transparent about your monitoring or your exposure or access to that information? And then lastly, employer to stakeholder. That's one, of course, that's very important as well for all of us. Those of us who have a stake in the business, in the work that we're doing, what's the transparency level that we're communicating upward to those stakeholders or outward? But for the purpose of the remainder of this session, we're going to talk about employer to employee. We're going to talk about why transparency is important in the workplace next. According to a Gallup 2023 survey study, of which Gallup is the preeminent, workforce survey arm or agency based out of Omaha, Nebraska in the world. They have access to more people and they produce more studies with a higher volume of employee engagement responses than any other organization in the world. And so when this study may not sound significant until you start to get the true grasp of the volume of numbers here. But according to a 2023 Gallup study, only 21% of the U.S. workers trust the leadership of their organization. This is down 3% since 2019. So in 4 years, we're talking about millions of employees, workers who are now saying they no longer trust the leadership of their organization. What's contributed to that? Well, I could ask a lot of questions, and I'm sure many of you would have examples and answers that you could share. But just some of them, if you think about the bulk of the workforce now making up millennials, and Zs, and then some of us Gen Xers in there, but a bulk of them being millennials. You think about the things that they were impacted them that weren't transparent, that were performed by bad actors in the business world. Think about the Tyco scandal of 2002, the housing crash of 2008, even the Volkswagen emissions scandal of 15, and the Wells Fargo credit scandal of 16, and on, right? All of those things being the anti-transparent practice of businesses kind of led to this mistrust, this assumed mistrust that employers aren't really here for the benefit of the team members that serve and work in their organizations on a daily basis. So it's kind of our responsibility to be able to assess that and say, okay, if I want to address that and I don't want that to be the perception of my factory workers or my office staff or whoever it is, my sales team, what are the intentional strategies that I'm going to put in place to be able to address that? So this concept of transparency becomes really important. Transparency builds trust. It begins to build trust back into the team that you're leading, into with the employees and the team members that you work with every day. Trust increases employee engagement. Why is that important? Well, employee engagement is a significant, if we want to get down to the dollars of it, is a significant expense to team members or to organizations in terms of the cost of replacement, to the cost of lost productivity, the cost of intentional sabotage, which happens occasionally for those employees that are actively disengaged within their organization. So building that trust begins to kind of help to restore, but it also gives you a very important it gives you something that's extremely, extremely important. It gives you information. It helps you make those decisions related to the next steps in your business, and especially related to the workforce. So what does Gallup find? Ultimately, why it's important? Gallup finds that there's a threefold increase in employee engagement, those things that I just mentioned, with employees who trust their organizational leaders, right? So that kind of brings us full circle. Who are some of those organizations? And this is where I'm going to ask you to send in responses in the chat. And Chris, I'm going to ask you to kind of share some of those that come in. But when I ask you this question, what are some of the most, do you feel like would be some of the most trusted companies or organizations that you can think of? So just mention, type in the chat of a company or an organization that you feel you trust either as a consumer or just as a person. What are some of the most trusted brands that come to the top of your mind?
All right, Toyota.
Toyota, excellent.
Target.
Target. Any others?
Tylenol. Apple.
Okay. Very good. I would love to spend time deep unpacking that and understanding, where those things are coming from. My guess, if I think of Toyota and I think of Apple, I think of things such as innovation, dependability, Target also accessibility, and Target consistently has their products have high levels of quality. In terms of the survey results. So I'm guessing all of those things contribute to your perception of trust in those organizations. Well, the number one most trusted organization, according to US consumers, is Patagonia. And it has been for 15 years, consistently the number one most trusted. Now, some of you on this call may not really be all that familiar with Patagonia, the kind of adventure gear and clothing manufacturer. But Patagonia, ever since Yvon started it 50 years ago, has consistently been one of the most trusted independent brands, and it has to the point where it has a cult following. One of the primary reasons behind that is Yvon, ever since he founded the company, has built his company on this concept of transparency, all the way from where they source materials, who manufactures the products, giving transparency to that, how those workers are compensated and the working conditions in which they work in, all the way to the costs associated with the products that they then sell. So those types of transparent practices have been a big part of who Patagonia has been since it started, and has been consistent. So this is where I'm talking about this idea of whatever you decide you're going to do from a transparency perspective, even if it's a simple step as a leader that you're going to instigate, be consistent with it and make sure that you're following through on those practices. All right, so how can transparency be modeled? So we've talked a little bit about who does it well, where maybe this concept of why we're even talking about rebuilding trust. Why is transparency important? So now we want to look into a little bit of how can transparency be modeled by you as a leader? Well, there's some very simple steps. None of these are particularly revelatory, but I like to think of these types of sessions as like idea sessions. And so these are things that can be just simple reminders and maybe things that you can put in your toolbox to be able to kind of implement and start to test the waters for doing this in terms of being intentional to communicating this concept of transparency to your team members, to your employees. So just listening and giving an opportunity for feedback. Well, when we say transparency, what I've been talking about up to this point has mostly been within the concept of being able to give the employer giving information down to the team members and the workers. But also important in transparency is giving an opportunity, and maybe even a great starting point is to be able to give your team an opportunity to speak to you and listen to what they're saying and allow them the opportunity, the space to provide feedback on things that are of importance to them. Regular communication, making sure that you are in front of your team, giving regular updates. What are some of the tools or methods, strategies that you have to consistently communicate? If it's just a quarterly earnings call, that's probably not enough. People like to know and like to stay engaged with all aspects of the business. They like to think that what they're doing when they come to work every day is more than just punching in and punching out. They want to know the bigger story. So communicating those things to team members consistently helps them to feel more of a part of the organization that they're supporting and that they're committing their work to every day. Being available. I realize that there's a lot of you that have workers and team members that are spread across the country and maybe the globe. So looking at ways in which you can make yourself available or making other leaders available might take some creativity, but as simple as doing a session like this and allowing just a feedback session via Teams or a Zoom call or something, so that certain members of the organization can communicate things, where you can share in smaller groups updates on product deliveries or production numbers, things like that. Just making yourself as a leader available. Don't underestimate the importance that just your presence and your personal connection with your team members has on the engagement of those team members. Modeling your mission, vision, and values. I bet if I went on any one of your company's websites, within a few clicks, I could find some purpose statement or a mission statement or something about your company's values, right? Making sure that the communication, this concept of transparency, is consistent with those is extremely important. Because if you are a company that thrives on, the patents that your company has or holds or things like that, and then you are in public meetings revealing some important proprietary information, obviously you're not doing the best for your business. So just being honest about what it is within the context of the business that you're all a part of that you can share, and then being consistent in giving that feedback is great, because you're not always going to be able to share all things, but being honest about why you can't is the most important. Most of the time when people say, this company, they don't share anything or they don't follow through, it's simply because they don't know the reason why that wasn't possible. So making sure that you communicate that takes time, takes effort, but really, really helps to stem the tide of unhappiness and disengagement. And then take ownership. When things aren't going well, when mistakes happen, when promises or expectations aren't met, taking ownership of that as a leader. It's one of the most endearing aspects, qualities that a leader can have, is when they stand in front of a team and share that, you know what, I made a mistake, or we as an organization missed this, and here's some of what I can share with you as to the why. Being open and honest and transparent with those mistakes or those situations is incredibly engaging, and it draws, I promise it's one of the most empowering things that you can do as a leader, to draw team members to trust you. If you are looking to build that trust and they say, listen, this person isn't pointing fingers at me. They're not saying, oh, if it wasn't for sales, just not missing their numbers, then we'd be fine. There's no finger pointing. It's taking ownership of strategy. It's taking ownership of execution in the way. Now, I'm not talking about taking ownership for things that you didn't have any, responsibility over, but being honest in your communication is one of the most valuable things, and really one of the most endearing things that leaders can do to earn the trust of their team members. And then follow through. Again, if you say it, if you're going to do something, if you're going to say every quarter I'm going to do this, or every week I'm going to do this, or whatever the cadence is, follow through and make sure that you're doing it, because I promise the team members are watching. So what are potential challenges to transparency? Well, some of the potential challenges in this day and age, especially since we've come out of kind of the pandemic, is now we kind of, when we turn the lights on, so to speak, we have access we have access to information and data on our workforce that we never had before, or that we were never really intentional to watching. So you'll hear stories on the news. You would hear stories about productivity and how companies were monitoring production. So there's this concept of transparency of production. What are the numbers? Who's falling behind? Who's not producing? And then publicly sharing that within the organization is a type of transparency that you have to be very intentional and think very long and hard about before you venture down that road. Transparency of benefits and compensation. This whole push toward compensation transparency is extremely popular right now. And in some states of the individuals that I'm on a call with right now, it's required. There are positives and I think some very compelling concerns and negatives for it as well. So making sure that if you are in a state or if you're on a place where that is not required, thinking through the why behind that and being open and honest about those types of things that impact employees related to benefits and compensation is important. Transparency of activity, i.e. keystrokes and machine activity. Again, it's related to the production. You hear about when companies were really pushing remote and they were concerned that employees and team members weren't really working as hard as they would if they'd been in the office. They started monitoring keystrokes and machine activity. I can give you an example. About 2 years ago, I was approached by a senior leader on my team that asked if I would help him monitor some email activity. What we did was we landed on a compromise because I wasn't comfortable with that exactly as it was proposed. So what we did was we said, hey, listen, what we're going to do is we are going to collect information on a Friday related to email traffic. This was going to be inter-office email traffic. And then we were just going to simply compare it to Wednesday. And then we were on a Wednesday or Tuesday, I forget what day it was. And we were going to share that. We had agreed that there wasn't going to be any action taken. There wasn't going to be anything. It was going to simply be information that was transparently shared so that team members could understand what we were seeing as a leadership team related to the productivity the production from an email perspective of a Friday based, say, during a different day within the week. And what we found was the activity was significantly, I don't remember the percent, but it was in the double digits, less than it was on a Friday than it was during the other days of the week. Transparency of electronic communications, email, chat, things like that. As I mentioned earlier, there's now access to being able to monitor email chat. I do not recommend it. And if you do that for a very business specific reason, I highly recommend that you transparently communicate that you do that and the why behind it. Okay. So lastly, and probably the most important thing that I've been talking through as we've been going through this whole kind of session is identify and name the true motive for transparency. What are you really, and this is going to take some self-searching, right? Some soul searching about what is it that you're really hoping to be able to get from being intentionally more transparent. If transparency is just one aspect of building trust, if that is ultimately your motive, then make sure that you're being consistent throughout that and that you're not then doing other things that undermine that trust. It can take time to really realize that some of the habits that we have developed either as leaders or as organizations are actually things that we don't want to share. And they're for reasons of maybe not being transparent and for reasons that would potentially undermine the trust that our team members, our employees had in us if they were to be made aware of that. So it's something that you kind of just need to really be intentional about. If you truly name the motive and then build a transparency plan or an action plan related to that motive and follow through with it, you will see an increase in engagement. You will see an increase in those team members that are reaching out. And I believe wholeheartedly, you'll begin to build a greater environment of trust within your organization. And as I mentioned earlier, as an educator, as somebody that likes to develop programs but always wants to assess the value of them, whatever strategy or intentional steps you take related to this for transparency or whatever it may be, make sure you have an opportunity to be able to assess how it's going and then get information together and get those that aren't directly involved, that maybe aren't as biased, that are also participating and help them get them together to help you evaluate how that strategy is going. There are a lot of tools that are out there. I've mentioned Gallup. Gallup they have a survey called the Q12 survey, which measures employee engagement. There's probably individuals on this call that use that within their organization. It's a great way to be able to understand your employees' workforce engagement. The great thing about it is that there's millions of surveys that have been done. So you have a great pool at which to be able to measure how you are doing against other organizations, all the way down to your industry and all the way down to your region. So that's one way in which you can assess and evaluate how you're doing from a trust perspective and engagement. Panel discussions, get other leaders together and invite team members, employees. You can do this via Teams, you can do it in person, you can do it individually. Obviously it's not a panel, but discussions with like feedback sessions. Third-party consultants. There's a lot of them out there that would gladly come in and do an assessment on how your workforce is and how your team members perceive the trust levels of the organization and specifically of the organization's leadership. It's important, in my opinion, of any of these assessments that you do, that you engage, it's important to me that, and I think it's important to the organization that you first and foremost share that you're doing it, share the why, transparently share the why, and then transparently share the results. I will give you another example. Was asked to do this within the organization to kind of do some focus groups for the purpose of retooling a mission statement for the company. And I had a third-party consultant that was helping me in doing this. So together we spent weeks kind of identifying who the individuals were going to be. And then we spent another few weeks doing the actual focus groups. We had great qualitative and quantitative data, and at the end of the day, we had some themes that were very clearly jumping off the page that were going to drive. So we thought the direction of the retooling of the mission and give us direction moving forward. But what happened was, unfortunately, there was a senior leader who grabbed onto one specific aspect of it and then wanted to build the entire kind of mission purpose statement around that one aspect, even though it didn't necessarily reflect the entire scope of the results. So what happened is, in essence, is once that was revealed, I started getting emails from those that participated and said, hey, this isn't what we talked about. This isn't what we shared. So immediately that trust was dented a little bit. There was a little bit of damage in that, and we had to do some kind of follow-up conversations. But that is one of the examples, if you're going to do these kinds of things, that you need to make sure that you're willing to receive the results, and then you're willing to move forward with those instead of trying to kind of manipulate, if you would, the information that you receive. Also, you can assess and evaluate from a production perspective. Are you seeing noticeable changes, increases, decreases in production? Retention is one of the best ways and probably one of the most telling ways that you can determine, that you can assess. It's going to take some time, but retention numbers or attrition numbers, depending on how you want to look at it, will tell you as to whether or not your efforts are making a difference. And again, if you have a strategy related to transparency that is focused on employee engagement, employee retention, you can be very, very clearly identify some of the aspects of the strategies that you're putting in place as to whether or not they're making a difference and having an impact. Okay, so I went through that information quick, and I realized 20 minutes, 25 minutes actually of talk time of me just talking is a lot. But what I want to do before we go into Q&A, actually what I want to do is Chris and I talked, and I'm going to let Chris take it from here, is share an example from Jerry Zimmerman of one strategy and one way in which he has taken to kind of do this concept of transparency within his team.
Yeah, so this is going to be a story from our company, and one that we've seen played out in recent years. And I just thought it would be a great example for us taking what Bronson shared and see how it's applied at an actual business. So Jerry, take it away.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bronson and Chris. Yeah, Bronson mentioned it. Transparency and communication is really key to any successful relationship, whether it's personal or a business. And this organization, throughout its history, has always been very transparent. That's driven by the owners on down, and I'm trying to continue that practice. But it struck me a few years ago that while we were very transparent, the way we did that was providing access to information. So anybody in this company could go into our system and find out about our financials and see how we're doing. But you had to go get it. You had to know how to go get it. And even if we showed you how to do that, unless you did that all the time, you probably didn't go do it. So they didn't go access it. And then March of 2020 showed up. And like many of you, we didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what COVID was. I didn't know what the pandemic was. I didn't know if we could be in business. I didn't know what the CDC did. Lots of our folks now were working remotely. It became clear that we need to communicate with everybody on very specific things about, are we still in business? What does our business look like? Where are we going to be? So I started a bi-weekly at that time an email to employees on a Friday and then on a Monday, just updating because things were changing so fast. And that went on throughout 2020. And as 2020 came to an end, things started to settle down. We got into 2021. I started doing that once a week. And I'll credit Chris Houston with coming to me probably sometime in 2021 as code was kind of getting in the rearview mirror and when business was back to normal and we were solid. He said, you know what, I think you should continue doing these things irrespective of the pandemic because folks really appreciate knowing what's going on. And what I was communicating was at the first, things about the pandemic. And then it became things about the business, things about our industry, things about the economy and how that affects our business and industry. Quite honestly, some fatherly advice that may or may not have been well received. But as I talk to folks, I realize like delivering information is way more effective than giving people access to information. So, and it's not just me. I do that every week, but then that opens a door up for lots of questions from other folks about what are you talking about, or what about this, or you said this, or what's going on now. And the entire management team at Livingston Name It is a part of this. And again, the owners have always had an open door policy. We continue to have an open door policy. And why do we do this? We talked about this, Bronson Trust talked about our motive. Our motive has always been about awareness. We want people to understand what's going on with their business. We want them to understand why it is we do what we do. We want them to trust us. And while they might not agree with the decisions we make, I want them to trust that we're doing it with the right intentions. And when we tell them what's going on, they can understand, like, this is why we're doing what we're doing. And it's really allayed a lot of fears, I think, that people have, because if you're not getting communicated to, you make stuff up and you conjure things up in your own mind. And so we've been really clear about, like, this is what's going on. And I'm going to tell you the good and the bad. I tell them the good things that are going on, and I tell them when things aren't going very well. And sometimes things don't go well. And quite honestly, they know that, and it's best just to admit it and get it out there. So that's really the key for us. Again, I credit Chris and Anita Shaw for helping monitor this and getting the feedback with employee surveys. And Bronson mentioned retention. We are a 77-year-old company of 150 employees. And I can't think of another organization that has so many people that have been here 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50 years. People don't leave this company. And I think people don't leave this company for a number of reasons. But I think a big part of that is that they trust us.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that example, Jerry. Chris, do you want to open it up to anybody else that may have questions or anything? I'll leave this facilitation part to you.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So, I mean, Bronson said so many fantastic nuggets, and I just hope y'all were able to glean some of those. Remember, this is recorded, so you can go back and watch it. But we just do want to open it up. If anybody does have any questions, feel free to unmute and ask, or drop something in the chat, and we'll see if anything happens from there. So does anybody have any questions for Bronson, for Jerry, or for the group?
I have a question. This is Ann. I'm just wondering if you've had any negative experiences with trying to be transparent. Either one of you.
Yeah, I can give you a quick example. Yes, we have, and I can tell you that it was self-inflicted. And it was really, it was an example of, I don't know, it wasn't worth pointing fingers. It was coming out of actually it was in the midst of the pandemic at my organization that I was at. And we had to do a layoff, a workforce reduction as they were being called at the time. It was relatively minor from the perspective of the number of employees that we had versus the number that we were laying off, but still those were individuals, right? Families, providers, things like that. And the communication that the method and the way in which it was communicated, we thought at the time was appropriate, but then learned very, very quickly in the fallout of it that it was not. And we did it as a group call. And many of you may remember the fallout that came from the better.com CEO doing that in an email of multiple hundreds of people. Well, we did it in a group of 20 some, and it was one of the things that I'll never forget. We were transparent. We thought we were being honest and upfront. But what we realized is that we weren't allowing the dignity of the individuals who'd committed their time to us to really have the opportunity to hear individually and ask questions. And so that was one of the things where it was, looking back, I shake my head. I'm like, why would I have thought that was a good idea? But we were in agreement, and it didn't work. It wasn't a good strategy.
Thank you. And the only reason I ask is so that we could maybe learn some lessons from things that you've already learned.
So, Ann, I'll share a little something that some might consider it a negative, but I don't. And that is because we are so transparent and we have such an open door policy. And I wander around, as do others in this organization, and talk to folks. I've gotten questions and feedback that are like, well, I don't agree with that, or I don't like what you did here, or I don't understand why you do this. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with people pushing back and giving me a chance to explain. And at the end of the day, we might not agree. But if I hadn't shared that with them, they wouldn't have known, and they might have made up something worse in their own mind. But yeah, that's the one thing you're going to be prepared for, is that if you're going to be transparent, you're going to get some pushback on stuff, and you have to be willing to take other people's opinions.
Okay.
Thank
Are there
you.
any other questions? That was a great one. All right. Well, hopefully you guys have been able to glean some things that you can be thinking more about. Bronson built this about transparency being that builder of trust within an organization. And just know that just because you have a title doesn't mean that trust is guaranteed. Trust is something that you have to work on and build and take the time to do. So those practical tips that he gave about listening, having regular communication, being available, don't underestimate the power of presence with your teams. Power of authenticity. These are all things that aren't easily done, but when you do them, they can make a big difference. If you want to think about a healthy organization, think about the creativity that's within the organization that is willingly shared. In a healthy organization, one that is built on trust, you're going to see folks more willing to share creative ideas. When you're in an unhealthy organization, what you'll see is people withholding those ideas. So if you want to take a look at y'all's companies and begin to think about practically, where are we? Where are we really? Think about those types of things. And if you see that you're not where you want to be, that's all right. Start doing something to create a plan of execution that you can begin to apply things like transparency and authenticity and begin to see a shift within your cultures. So I appreciate y'all taking the time to be a part of this. The recording will be available following this onto the FPDA website. The survey will be going out from Kathy here shortly. Please give your feedback. Want to really give a big thank you to Bronson and to Jerry for taking part in this, and for you all giving your time. Kathy, is there any last minute things that we need to touch on before we let people go? You're on mute.